Thank you very much, Rebecca. Good morning to everyone, and I hope everyone's having a good day. So we're going to be spending some time talking about what the next steps are. Really, we're all in a situation where we're feeling like, whoo, we've managed to survive. We got all the people we could working remotely. We've managed to put in all the interim processes and steps that we can. We've made it. But now the question becomes, you have a second, you've gone through the emergency, you've gone through the fire drill. What do you do now? What's the next steps that you go through? And that's what we're going to spend some time talking about in sort of a short, medium, and long-term kind of effect. The very first thing to say is that you need to immediately, if you haven't already started already, take time to evaluate the response that you've just gone through. How well have you accomplished? What have you done? And some of the things that we see out there that you should be focused on are, first, spend some time thinking about what worked. What hardware you used that was particularly successful? What software programs really worked as you transitioned to a remote environment? What services were particularly effective? And what processes that you already had in place really transitioned well in this environment? Try and identify the things that are very successful so that you can continue to use those things and reinforce them, use them in other ways. And then, of course, you want to document all of this. You want to make sure that you write it down because it's easy to know what's going on now and to think and to understand what's happening. The hard part is to know in the future when you start getting into your strategic planning and next year when you're starting to think about, man, you remember we went through all of this? What was actually good for us? So do the work right now when it's fresh in your mind, when you remember it, but go ahead and make sure and document it so you'll remember it later. Then also think about what failed, what things didn't work, what just totally face planted for you. Services that couldn't transition to this environment, software that wasn't up to the challenge, processes that just didn't apply and didn't work. Any other failures that you come up with. Make sure and document all of this as well, because this is even more important than the list of things that worked. This is the stuff that just didn't work, that you had to overcome, that you had to work through, that you had to jury-rig some kind of solution for. And that's what you really need to be able to spend time on, is this list here. So spend some time sitting down and asking everybody in the organization, hey, what worked for you, what didn't? Don't just ask, say, the IT team or the senior leadership, but ask the average worker who moved from an on-premise, in-office environment to home. What didn't work for you? What was really the biggest pain points? What really hurt? What didn't do so well for you? And this is the list that you want to really spend some time on. But you also want to ask, what wasn't there at all? What was missing? Was there hardware you didn't have? Did you all have your people working still with desktop PCs? And so there was a shortage of laptops, is one of the things we've heard from some of our customers. Did you have customers that just didn't have remote capabilities and they all of a sudden had to try and bring that in and grab it? Some of their basic line of business software didn't work in a remote environment. Had to come up with ways to do that. They didn't have cloud-based services that could easily transition from a premise to a home situation. There weren't processes for people working at home and doing the same job when they weren't in the same office. These are things that you really want to fill in those holes later on. So you need to create a list of each and every one of those services, and this can be the beginning of your strategic planning. So now that you've got all of this documented, now you've spent the time right now while it's fresh in your memory, where the pain's there, where you still got the scars. Use this to drive your future strategic planning, to think about, what are we going to do? What are we going to change? We found these holes. How are we going to fill them in permanently? We band-aided this. What are we going to do to patch this all together and to make it work more successfully in the future? What are we going to do to make sure that those things that just didn't work for us do work for us in the future? And how are we going to capitalize on all those successes and things that worked well? How are we going to make sure that those are as successful as possible and we reinforce them? Think about it in terms of not just, oh, okay, business as usual, but what's going to go on in budgetary planning? And what are we going to spend money on? What are we going to change and shift our future direction? Pull out, your strategic vision for the next 5 years and reevaluate it in the light of all this documentation that you've just done of what worked, what didn't, and what you're missing. And possibly the most important part, don't just share it amongst yourselves. Broadcast the results to the whole organization. Make sure everyone knows about it, because one of the key portions here areas. Maybe the IT team talks about this, or maybe some of the sales or customer service or other key operational divisions talk about it. But does everybody in the organization know about it, so that when strategic planning comes about, when your executive leadership looks and says, what do we need to focus on, they remember the results of what you're talking about now. And you can pull it out at that time and say, hey, look, we did this. We did a review. We came out with all of this, and here's the results. But it's better if you talk about it now and then talk about it later as well. And they'll remember that discussion. So make sure and talk about it. Get out there and yell at people and tell them about what's going on and what you found out and what didn't work, so that they know. And so when you're talking about shifting and changing priorities and making changes, they'll know why. So that's the first step. The immediate thing you need to do, you need to be doing this right now. If you're not already doing it, you need to be writing this down. You need to be documenting all of this, because it's so easy to get on to other things and forget. And then you're trying to remember and you lose the immediacy of the knowledge. But the next thing you have to do is maintain what's been put in position. Depending upon where you are in the country, you may have people working at home for quite a while. You may have different parts of the organization where you're transitioning the organization back to on-premise while others stay at home for a while. It's a big unknown for all of us right now. But what you have to do at this immediate point is you're going to have to continue supporting and maintaining those people at home. And there's a number of things to think about as you do that. First is solution reliability. One of the statistics that really has jumped out at us, and this is even before the great move to the at-home work that we've seen in the last couple months, is that remote workers almost overwhelmingly see technical problems as their biggest challenge working at home. They see the inability to get tools to work, the inability to make things operate efficiently. Maybe they can get video conferencing up, but the picture's terrible. They can't get the audio to work. They can't figure out how to operate because it's not easy to use. Almost 80% of them had problems working with their on-premise workers at the time. And now everybody's remote. That's gotten even worse. So the question you have to ask yourself is, how are you going to support all of this? And what kind of additional resources are you going to put in place to maintain and be more effective? How are you going to make sure and work with those remote workers on a long-term basis? You really need to be thinking about this. If you already don't have the plan in place, if you haven't figured out the processes, this may be one of those pieces that you're missing. That gap of how do I actually support them? This may be bringing in an additional organization, somebody like Vertical, for example. We're done a lot of great work here. We helped hundreds of our customers move their employees home and set up processes and begin working in this way. So this is something we can certainly help with, but maybe it's staffing more organizations to your help desk, being able to provide more resources, expanding knowledge base capabilities so people have more references to look at. And it can also mean reevaluating services you have. If you're getting a lot of reports back in that the problems are ease of usability of the various pieces of software or cloud services that your customers are using, then you may want to reevaluate them and say, well, maybe we need to transition to something else. Because bringing this number down is one of the most important things you can do in maintaining the success and productivity of your staff that's now in a remote environment. Another key one is to look at your network connectivity. Now, we're no longer talking about the network connectivity in your office. We're talking about the network connectivity at your remote workers' homes. Very different kind of thing. You can't just leave this to the worker, though. You can't say, hey, look, this is your responsibility. You got to have, Comcast or Verizon or whoever, and good luck with that. You've got to be involved with this. One of the ways to do this is to be able to provide them with network assessment tools that can just be emailed to them and let them run and be able to understand what's going on and where there may be problems. One of those pieces to understand here is it's not just about, oh, I've got a big connection. I've got, 100 megabits. It shouldn't be any problem. It's not just about the speed. It's not just about the capacity, but it's about the reliability of the connection. For example, if you're doing video conferencing, which all of us are doing now, if you're doing a webinar, shared sessions, or even just voice over IP phone calling, you have to worry about things like terms like jitter and latency. And these are additional pieces and parts. You need a tool that will evaluate the ongoing reliability of the connection, not just tell you, oh, it's really fast. It's not good enough. In the cases where you have employees who have continuing problems and continuing concerns, you may think about investing in their location, maybe providing them a secondary internet connection so they can switch back and forth in terms of failover and reliability. Consider these are consumer-grade home connections. They can still be very cheap and had for under $100 a month, so 2 of them is not going to necessarily break the bank. You can think about putting in such things as SD-WAN solutions, which is software-defined wide area networking. If you don't know what that is or want to learn more, we have a whole number of webinars on that already available on the Vertical website, so you should go check that out. But software-defined wide area networking, or SD-WAN, allows you to basically make a connection that's not doing its best job more efficient and more effective by using software that's constantly monitoring it and doing everything it can to optimize that connection. It can also do automatic failover. I mentioned the backup connection. One real possibility is to use cell data. Our mobile devices have become so needy of data that the connections that we use today are really quite effective. You can put a voice over IP call over them. You can potentially even put a single video call over them. And the good news is usually those connections only need to be able to support one user because that's all there is at that location now, right? But think about very carefully what you're going to do to try and help and support those users over time with their network connections. What do you do when their connection goes out? What's your solution for that? Are they just dead in the water and they're not going to work for the day? Or is there some way that you can help them and support them? You need to be thinking about how you're going to maintain those network connections. Another concern to think about is confidentiality security, because you've got new threats that you never had before. Remote workers have to deal with who else is in the house. Who's listening in on conversations? Is somebody having a confidential discussion about important company business? Or is there, patient confidential information or client confidential information being talked about? Who's listening and who's going to be able to hear about that? Are there other people in the house? Is there a spouse that may be working from home as well? Worse, is that spouse on a conference call as well, where they might be able to hear your call and other people on their call can hear it too? Could it be little ears hearing and other people hearing in your house, other family members? You got to think about those things. These are concerns that normally don't apply in the office. And even more importantly, think about smart devices. We have them all over the place now, whether they're Amazon's Alexa, Apple's Siri, the Google Assistant, be they smartphones or dedicated devices like the smart speakers that seem to be everything. These are getting built into more and more devices. And the problem is they're listening all the time. Now, they may say they're only listening for a keyword, but that means they're listening and in some cases recording short snippets of the information back to a third-party servers. If you have truly confidential information your organization is dealing with, think about it. Do you want that information on somebody else's servers? Real concern to have. Another problem that we're seeing more and more of in the field is hardware. We all think about cloud and software and it's all virtual and we've gotten rid of all this stuff. But somewhere at the bottom, there's still a device that you need to interact with all this. Whether it's a laptop, a phone, a tablet, you still need a device of some kind. And that device can have quite a few problems. One of the things that I heard very recently from a customer was somebody saying, hey, look, this remote work setup is great. Everything's wonderful. Except my laptop just died. And now they're telling me it's going to take 10 days to get a replacement, and I have no way to do work for a week and a half. This is becoming a very real problem as we're seeing more demand for remote capabilities. So you can have problems with replacements. Vendor inventory can be backed up. There can be long ship times as more and more is being delivered, whether it be groceries, toilet paper, all those other needs that people are getting shipped to their houses now. And now your replacement devices in that queue. So you have to think about this and how that's going to impact maintaining all of your remote workforce. How are you going to get them a remote device if they have something that dies, if they have a failure? Some of the things that we think about are increasing your spares inventory. So making sure that you have extra of these devices now, making sure that they have a higher importance in your backlog of equipment. Make sure that you have the ability to offer key business services on multiple devices. So not only just be able to get to your key communications and line of business software on your laptop, but make sure it works on mobile phones, on tablets, on multiple different devices, so people have options where they can continue at least working maybe in a degraded form, but can continue to operate. And consider accessories in all of this. Things like webcams, Voice over IP phones, headsets, all of these have become much more important. And the problem is they've become more important to everybody. If you haven't noticed, these have become much more expensive and they're backlogged, and it can be, oh, hey, I'll just order another Logitech camera online. That'll be no problem. Yes, but it may not get to you for a month, or it may cost 6 times what it did. We have seen devices that used to cost $50 now cost $200 or $300. So you need to be thinking about that and what kind of things are absolutely critical for those day-to-day operations, and are there backups? For example, for cameras and headsets, one of the backup devices may be the laptop itself, almost all of which have built-in cameras to them. So while you may have a dedicated camera that you've provided to them, you might be able to use the laptop as a backup. Their voice over IP phone, you may have provided them a dedicated handset, like the one I'm pointing at you off to the left that you can't see. Kind of silly of me. But that phone can be valuable as well, but it can be replaced by something like your mobile device with a mobile unified communications client, or even your laptop with a soft phone built into it can be backups. So think about what the backup plans are. What are the failovers when people can't get these devices quickly? And think about what the delivery times are going to be and how quickly you all can replace them. The worst kind of nightmare scenario I've heard about is one organization that ordered a bunch of new devices from a major manufacturer. They moved all of their users home. They got a bunch of laptops and tablets, and about 48% of them failed and had to be replaced. Just the nightmare to have to deal with that. So definitely think very carefully about what kind of hardware is going to be needed, what the way to deal with that is. Think about the network connections, how you're going to support that. Think about all the other technical problems. What is your methodology? Do you have the processes in place to provide support for it? So that's sort of your medium-term thinking here. But then let's get into the key thing of what's the long-term thought process here? What kind of real change is going to come out of all of this? And one of the things that we like to talk about is the long-term value of these remote workers, because the fact that you've had to spend all this effort, all this time moving people remote, moving them home, may actually be a real value and the savior of your company, to be honest. We all know the incredible problems that are going on with the economy, the number of people who are out of work, the potential for loss of revenue from organizations small to large, the inability to fund private or nonprofit organizations and local, state, and government. All of this is looking to be a nightmare. And so trying to figure out the long-term ways to save money, to reduce expenses. And one of the great parts is the remote effort that we've just put in may be the answer to a lot of this. Because there are huge numbers of benefits now that we've bothered to put in all the effort to move people home. The difficulty with remote work was always, well, I've got to figure out all this stuff to move people back to their homes and not have them work in the office. I've got to figure out the processes. I've got to get the technology in place. I've got to get people comfortable doing all of that. Done. That's all fixed. So now we should look at what the benefits we could get out of it if we consider keeping people at home. Some of the things that we've seen here at Vertical are cost savings, employee productivity, and even hiring and retention. And these are all things that can be a huge benefit and bonus to us in the coming months. So let's think about that for a moment. First, more than anything else, real estate cost savings. If we consider with the fact that we've moved so many workers home, and it's not the whole organization, one of those misconceptions is, oh, everybody's working remotely. We know there's a large percentage of the population that isn't, and they have to be in place, whether it's in retail, healthcare, whether it's in the delivery business, or a lot of other places where we have to have people working at on premise and on the front lines, as we talk about it a lot. But there's a ton of people who've moved home at this point, and that means there's a lot of empty office space standing out there. Now, even before any of this happened, before this goes on, there were a lot of companies that were already investing in this. Dell had moved a large portion of their office force home and saved around $12 million annually in real estate expenses. Aetna Insurance, HP, Microsoft, BP have all done major savings by moving workers home and then closing the real estate involved. Vertical Communications itself made this initiative about 3 years ago. We save around $2 million annually by moving most of our workers home and closing most of our office real estate. We've moved our techs to working with vans that they keep at home and storage lockers with those key hardware spares we were just talking about, so that they're available and in a location where somebody can go pick them up. But otherwise, we've closed offices and gotten rid of a huge amount of real estate. And the savings are very real. It's one of the top 3 line items on almost anyone's P&L. If you can get rid of some of that real estate, then you're going to be able to have some major cost savings. And so here's one of those long-term considerations. Should I move people back to the office? I've gotten them used to being at home, gotten them used to working in this environment. I've solved a lot of the problems. This may be a way that we can really cut the company's bottom line and be able to be still effective. But there are other real dollar savings going on here. So the average company that works people more than 50% of the time remotely saves around $11,000 per person annually. So where does that money come from? Well, it comes from things like ongoing expenses within the office place. You can think about simple things like the resources in a break room, coffee, snacks, paper towels, those simple factors. Things like the first aid kits that you find in every office space, the needs for the bathroom, the support, the janitorial services. All of these secondary expenses really start to add up when you can remove them beyond just the real estate costs. You can remove all these operational expenses. You have less equipment that you need. You don't have to worry about copiers, fax machines. Yes, there are still a lot of people using fax machines. Printers. All of this equipment can no longer have to be leased or owned and can be gotten rid of. You can have lots of savings from the commuting perspective. You can reduce people's travel costs. There's a whole host of costs that will be saved by keeping your workforce at least partially remote over time. And this can have a real impact on the company as a whole. Even more, you can look at company employees becoming more productive as they work at home. The first number starts out really simply. If somebody's working at home that has been going into the office, there is anywhere from a 45 minutes to a couple of hours commute time that is now saved. That's time that they could be working even more. That's time that they can spend on work-life balance. But you've got a major time savings of something that was mostly just a waste of time previously. The average commute is anywhere from 45 minutes to 2 hours, depending on where you are in the country. And that time is now given back to the worker to use. And the result is the worker tends to use that to work. AT&T found that when they moved workers remotely, those workers averaged 5 more hours a week than the people that they kept on premise. Cardiff University did a study and saw that 73% of remote workers put in more work because they were working at home. And the list goes on of studies that just show an incredible productivity increase. Most of the time that you see that people would save from commuting, they're going to spend on working at home. They're going to continue working, and they're going to be more productive. But there's a little more subtle kind of pieces going on here as well. One of them is reduced absenteeism, fewer people calling in sick and ill and not working. The American Management Association did a study on this and determined that remote workers ended up resulting in 63% fewer unscheduled absences. They're less likely to take a day off for minor medical appointments or other health errands. They don't call in sick when other family members are ill because they have the flexibility to be able to work while being able to do some of the basic tasks of, I need to get them soup, I need to check on them, take their temperature, make sure they're all right. They're also able to return to work more quickly after a serious medical issue because they can convalesce while doing some work at home. That's where they already is, their primary workplace. And so there's a major benefit here in reduction of the amount of time that workers take off. But that's just the individual worker who's sick or ill or who has a problem. There's a secondary factor, which is sick remote workers don't infect other employees. They don't have a problem with causing someone else to be sick. Sorry. Hold on here. So this can be a real benefit as well. You don't have the office flu going around where all of a sudden tons of people are out because of the fact that they are unable to work. They got it from somebody else. And that's a win for everybody. So you're looking at people who have got more time in their hands because they're not commuting. They're more productive in the time that they spend at home, and they're less likely to call in sick. They've got reduced absenteeism, and they're not getting other people sick within the organization. Huge benefits here in just increasing the base productivity with the existing workforce. So this can allow a lot of the organizations who've had to make unfortunate staffing cuts and reduce their workforce still be able to be productive and be effective by taking advantage of remote working. Now, until recently, these slides have to change a little bit, obviously, since we've had this massive unemployment hit. But until recently, until this coronavirus pandemic, we've had the problem that hiring has been difficult. We've been in an unprecedented job market that we've just had incredible results. But the thing that we found out is, even though it was hard to hire, remote working makes it easier. So now in the job market going forward, as we're all having to look at who do we bring back, we're a little more picky. We can find that we don't have to worry so much about offering higher salaries or get the right person or looking at that right cost. We can offer remote work as one of those continued options. It can have a real benefit and real advantage to the employees, and we've seen the advantage to the organization itself. People are willing to quit their existing job if they could go get a position that would offer them remote service. And beyond just being and making people more interested, you are no longer restricted to hiring in just one geographic market. Instead of having to think about, hey, look, I need all the people in one city, or depending upon the city, maybe I just need people on the north side because anybody who lives on the south side, it would take way too long to get here and it'd be terrible. You can now expand out to the entire country or even potentially the entire world. So this gives two different key benefits. One, your hiring potential, your hiring pool is broader. If you're looking for very specific skill set, you can find a wider variety of those people, whether instead of it just being, oh, there's this tiny group, you can really expand out those people. But the other part is you don't have to pay as much for the salaries for those expensive workers, especially things like tech workers, legal, healthcare workers, where salaries are much higher. You can be much more cost effective in those by spreading your job market out. We all know that, for example, San Francisco, New York, these are some of the places that have the highest, most expensive salaries in the country. But if you can hire, say, from Louisville, Kentucky, or Jacksonville, Florida, or Oklahoma City, Oklahoma, you can cut those same salaries by a third or more. And you can still get the same level of talent. You can get a broader array of talent. And so therefore, once again, we're looking at an effective way of reducing expenses while still meeting the needs that you have. And we've seen now that a lot more jobs than we ever thought possible are able to be done remote. We've really pushed the envelope on this one over the last couple of months. So this becomes a much more viable possibility. The other piece to consider is that you can retain workers more effectively by offering remote. One of the toughest pieces here to deal with are people who are concerned about whether or not they when and if they are going to have to go back into a on-premise environment. They're going to have to go back to an office. They may have healthcare concerns. But beyond those, just the nature of being able to offer people remote work is much more likely to keep people with the same company. If they have remote options long-term, then they're more likely to stay with the organization. Both Gartner and Global Workplace have done studies and shown that this is consistently true. People feel less stressed in at-home environments. They feel like they have a better work-life balance. People with kids are more likely to stay in a remote work position. So you can ensure the retention of those people who are the most important, people who've been with your organization for a long time, who have the skill set, who know how to do the job. There are a lot of other benefits here. You can have a more diverse workforce. There's more women generally that are seen in the remote work environment. Handicapped or people with disabilities There's an easier ability to use a remote work environment to bring them into the workforce and have full capabilities. You can get a broader set of viewpoints from across the country. You don't just have people in an urban environment. You can have more people from rural environments as well. You can have people from the north, from the south, from the west, from the east. It gives you a more diverse set of viewpoints, which can make your organization more competitive, both engaging with people from those different parts of the country, as well as in thinking of new ways to engage in your marketplace. So there's a lot of different reasons and a lot of different things. And this all sounds great, but it's more than just theory. It's becoming a reality already. Gartner did a survey at the very beginning of April of 317 major CFOs across the country, and 32% of them were already planning to rethink their on-premise technology buys in favor of remote services. So they're seeing what has happened over the last couple of months and saying, well, maybe buying more on-premise technology isn't the way to go. Because even more, 74% of them are thinking about taking 5% or more of their workforce and keeping them permanently in a remote work environment. So they're seeing exactly what we're talking about here and making that consideration a reality. And 13% are already moving to cut real estate spend based on that keeping remote workforce remote. So all the things that we're talking about here are already becoming reality. The piece is your company engaging in this? Are you all thinking about doing it? Are you thinking about how to engage? And this is possibly the biggest change you can make in your organization, most powerful strategic decision that you could make is to consider keeping those remote workers, whether some of them or all of them, in a remote environment and how that would impact and affect your organization. You can have major cost savings, increased employee productivity, and the ability to get the workers you need in critical roles. So there's a huge impact here. You could be one of the 317 here. I hope this information has been helpful. We've looked at the immediate impact of what you need to do. We've looked at the fact of you making sure that you're doing a survey now. You're going through, you're figuring out what went right, what went wrong, what worked, what didn't, what you were missing. You're using that for strategic planning, and you're letting everyone in the organization know what you've determined. We've gone through and looked at what it's going to take to maintain what you've got in place, looking at network connections, looking at support services, or what you're going to have to do to provide help desk and customer support for these people. We've talked about new challenges, things like hardware, confidentiality and security in this new workplace, and things you're going to have to address. And we've spent time talking about what your long-term strategy going out of this next year and the year beyond may be, to seriously consider taking your remote workers and keeping them remote. The incredible expense savings that you could have in your company, the reduction in costs, the effect of your workforce being more productive, even with fewer workers, like many of you have today, and looking at what the long-term impact of all of that is. So I hope this has sparked some interest and ideas and thoughts about how you're going to go forward. And I'd be happy to talk with you now about any questions, ideas, or thoughts that you have and what people are saying. So we have a question here about you need a solution to get people off their personal cell phones. And I assume by that you're meaning that you're going to be remote. They want to be using remote phones. And that's something certainly we can have somebody talk to you about on an individual basis. It looks like you've got a current vertical system. We can look at what the individual piece is. And certainly if you want to send me an email at kbutler@vertical.com, we can make sure that you've got a one-on-one individual person to talk to about this, and make sure that we can get you a solution. We can get one of our solution engineers working on that for you. That's no problem at all. Do we have other questions, concerns, things that people are seeing out there that they've seen as problems or issues that they need to resolve? Happy to talk about those, but I want to make sure we address everyone's questions and concerns.